Nice to meet everyone. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about why metrics aren't enough. They're a great starting point, but they're just not enough. So, just a quick introduction to myself. My name is Ivan Torres. Actually started in the DevOps space when DevOps was in its infancy. I really enjoyed evangelizing an area that had much intrigue at the time, but very little practical knowledge. To see where it's grown is awesome and validating for me of choosing an industry that would come to be deeply impactful in all facets of all businesses. So, secondly, I'm passionate about mentorship. I still have individuals that have worked with me and for me in the past who reach out and ask for advice. I think it's because they see how invested I am in all of them and how invested I am in what I do. I have even given talks about how to enter the tech space to younger individuals, college kids, and so on. So it's something that I'm really passionate about. Finally, I live in Boston, Massachusetts with my wife, a 4-year-old boy and a 2-year-old girl. But as anyone here in the city of Boston would attest, I am a proud New Yorker, almost too proud for some of the locals here, as some may imagine. Okay, so the industry has evolved tremendously over the past 10 to 15 years, right? It was just a short while ago that DevOps was seen as a sort of thing that the cool kids were doing. And now today it's ubiquitous throughout the industry with companies of all shapes and sizes. The evolution has put more power in the hands of engineering teams to be able to deliver more features faster than previously thought possible. We're also looking at engineering teams less and less as cost centers and rather the driving force behind differentiating in your market. That is why being data driven in engineering is no longer a nice to have, but a need to have in order to effectively compete in your markets. I've spoken to hundreds of engineering leaders who've confirmed as much just over this past year. Just as importantly, I have spoken to many folks who are using this data not to stank rank developers or even measure people, but what they're using these metrics to establish baselines, identify bottlenecks, remediate bottlenecks to ensure more predictability and efficiency along with helping the business and engineering align far more effectively. So today I'm very encouraged to be seeing some of the great outcomes for the early adopters in the area and look forward to more and more of these stories of organizations that are truly transforming their ability to deliver by becoming more data driven as it relates to their engineering organizations and their delivery. Okay, so in my conversations with engineering leaders across the world, I've come to three conclusions when talking about metrics. And here to the right, the Joker says a very funny line in the Dark Knight, where I think it reminds me oftentimes of these conversations I've had. So the three conclusions that I've come to terms with are number one, many aren't quite sure why they need the metrics. I often ask this very simple question, and typical responses are, yeah, we need to report up to the leadership. Or most consistently, I want to see what my teams or organization are doing. But when pressed about the why, like why is it more so important to roll this information up to your leader? Why do you want to see what your teams are doing? The responses become far less clear. You must have your why, and that why initially should be very simple. Okay, so it's number two. Once folks get this data, they don't know how to interpret it. So data points like the door metrics or velocity are outcomes. But oftentimes folks think of them as like the inputs, right? Like what you need to know to see how you're doing. I spend a considerable amount of time educating people into understanding that these very important metrics like DORA, like velocity, are indicative of the past. In order to influence your DORA metrics or your velocity, you actually need to take a look deeper into leading indicators of DORA or velocity, such as, for example, your PR process. The third thing is that they change over time, right? Just 5 years ago, we were talking about how important velocity was, and more organizations are moving towards like lead time or cycle time as the main metric that folks want to standardize around in order to affect delivery. Furthermore, focus is important, right? Once you have a bunch of data points for your organization and your teams, you want to make sure that each team is able to, or each organization or team is able to focus on a handful of data points that will improve them over the course of time. So think about the low hanging fruit, improve on those, then go and focus on different areas, right? Always remember you cannot fix everything at once. So that's something that I always like to make sure that people keep in mind where they try to do everything at once and often fail at everything together. So without the right metrics and understanding what they mean, you're like our friend here, Jack Sparrow, just sticking your finger in the air and trying to gauge where the wind is going and hope that you're going in the right direction. So the biggest problem with standards tools of the trade and best practices is that number one, the data typically exists in silos. The data is not easy to generate the views that leadership cares about. It's tough to connect the data and coordinate information from things like your project management system or your Git tools. There's little ways to validate whether your information is correct or not. So the point here is to always keep these things in mind, but that again, focus is incredibly important. Find data points that influence your door metrics, become an expert at interpreting them so that you have real insights. As you mature, become an expert in more and more data points. But again, do not boil the ocean. Make sure that you're able to interpret and gain insights from a handful of data points that are leading indicators of the things that people are looking to measure so that you're able to affect those correctly. But if you try to learn too many things at once, you're going to have a very, very difficult time. So again, and I'll say this one last time, focus is incredibly important. Pick a few data points, become an expert at them, understand how one data point may affect another as a leading indicator and lagging indicators, and you'll do far better in helping to improve your organization and your team, which actually leads me to my next slide. So quick story here. Last week, I was at the DevOps Enterprise Summit in Las Vegas and had many great conversations with some of the brightest minds in the world. So during the conference, I had a conversation with a customer of ours who asked, what should we expect to get out of this enhanced visibility that we're getting with LinearB? I was floored. He vouched for a purchase of LinearB, and he was asking me about what he should expect. My advice to him before we went into a deeper conversation about what we're doing here was to think about it backwards and start with the outcomes in mind, right? Always think, why do I want this data? What are the outcomes that I'm hoping to achieve with this data? So as we started to discuss a lot of the things that they care as an organization and where they're headed, we spoke a ton about their business. What is the business looking to do? How does engineering align with the business's priorities and initiatives? And how can engineering use the data to be able to better align to those things? And we came up with these four outcomes in front of you here. Number one, improve engineering efficiency. Sounds simple, but you would be surprised at how often people start to look at data without thinking about this first. So the main purpose of the data is you want to use it to be able to improve your teams, improve your organization, improve your efficiency. Why? Because you want to, number two, increase value delivery. Ultimately, you're here to provide value to your customers. And so we want to make sure that we're helping you to do that. So that's another one. The third one here, you want to exhibit a higher degree of trust between engineering, the business, and the customers, right? So think about it. To the business, you're making promises. You're telling them you're going to deliver things at a certain period of time, which who in turn are telling the market or maybe telling the market that there are things on roadmaps. So the ability to deliver on your promises more frequently will garner a higher degree of trust between engineering and engineering customers. Incredibly important here because the happiest organizations that I talk to are the ones that have high trust between engineering. The happiest engineering managers, the happiest engineering leaders are the ones that first and foremost have this high degree of trust between themselves and the business. And so to getting to that point is incredibly important to have happy engineers, lower attrition, so on and so forth. The next thing here is have more productive ceremonies. One of the most discouraging things I hear all of the time when speaking to people is that they'll set 3 hours aside on a Monday and have a sprint planning session and then end up delivering 20% of what they worked on and had another 50% unplanned work enter into their iterations or their sprints. So I always ask, what's the purpose of a planning session when it doesn't translate into what you actually deliver in any particular iteration? So that's incredibly, I would say it's a waste of time. If you're not going to be able to stick to a plan and execute on the plan, it's really difficult. So by being able to have data that like something that LinearB provides. So for example, what's my capacity to deliver? What's my planning accuracy? What's the distribution between planned and unplanned work, right? Having those data points in front of you. So as you're entering these sprint planning meetings, you can go in with data to suggest, hey, here's what we should focus on. Here's the buffer we should give for unplanned work because this is what we're seeing quite frequently. And here's what our capacity's been over the past. It's going to make these ceremonies far more productive as you mature as an organization. We want to help you, and you should be thinking about ways in which your conversations as an organization become more mature as well. That's going to have a lot more downstream effects than you would imagine. Next, the metrics alone aren't enough, right? So what we put in here was a short workflow that you can use um, that you can leverage as you're using these metrics to improve. So like you first want to start by with your baselines, right? You want to understand what are your baselines, both at an organizational level, at a squad level, at a team level, at a business unit level, but at all different levels, you definitely want to start with your baselines. Where are we today? And come to an agreement. One caveat to your baselines, and I tell this to folks all of the time, you don't need the baselines are neither good nor bad. They're just baselines. What happens next is where the important stuff happens. So next, what you want to do is once you establish your baselines, you start to see where you have areas of improvement. You want to create team working agreements. The reason to focus on individual teams is because each team will have different areas of improvements. Teams work on different parts of the code base, different products, different features. And the important part here is that no two teams are similar. Each team should be looked at very individually. So as they're creating team working agreements, we want to make sure that each team has the latitude to focus on the data for their teams and improve on the areas that they should improve on. The next one is now you have working agreements with the teams. Now you want to set team improvement goals. This is an area where also LinearB thrives at. We want to enable each team that enters into LinearB to be able to decide, hey, I could see that my biggest bottleneck here is our pull request pickup time. It's taking us far too long to pick up a pull request for review. That could be one team's goal, whereas another team's goal may be around the pull request size. We're not breaking our work up. And so each team should be able to have the ability to create their own goals. The next is use automation where applicable and available to improve your delivery. One example of that is LinearB's Git stream, right? So Git stream is an ability to create different swim lanes for your different types of pull requests in this example. So what do we mean by that? Is that not all pull requests are made equal. And far too often, that's how they go out. I talk to organizations all the time where you'll have one engineering manager reviewing all the pull requests for their team, irrespective of if the pull request is 5 lines of code that only touches, you know, text files, or a pull request is highly sensitive and touches like the most important parts of the code base. What we want to do with things like Gitstream is be able to have you create, using a rules engine, create different swim lanes for the different types of PRs that you have so that your most important resources are able to focus on your more crucial pull requests in this example, whereas the other pull requests that aren't as impactful, don't touch security and compliance components as much, can go to other areas, other team members to help distribute that load and ultimately help you merge faster, get to deployment better so that you can celebrate your wins with your team. So there's different mechanisms, but it starts with the baselines. You can introduce team improvement goals based on your bottlenecks. You can automate some of the delivery based on the different types of pull requests into your organization. And then finally, we want to help you celebrate your wins. You're going to be able to start seeing the types of wins that our customers are seeing here as it relates to this. Finally, metrics should be tailored to the whole organization. From executives who want to understand where are my investments going, to engineering managers who want to identify bottlenecks and remediate bottlenecks. And this goes all the way down to developers. You want to give your developers the tools that they need to merge as often as possible and spend more of the time delivering value to your customers and less of their time going through the bureaucracy that it takes to merge. The metrics should focus on that. I'll once again remind folks, I am not advocating that you measure individual developers. That is not helping here. Rather, we want to help you to focus on enabling your developers to deliver more by allowing them to do what they want to be doing, which is coding more often and merging more frequently. Coincidentally, these are the tenets of LinearB. Execs should be able to easily identify what's important to them. Teams should have the ability to see where they are stuck as it relates to their delivery flows, and developers should be enabled to focus on much higher value work. If you'd like to learn what this looks like, we'd be happy to have more discussions here with LinearB. And I appreciate everyone's time who tuned into this short talk around LinearB and how metrics alone aren't enough. Rather, they're just a means to an end. Thank you.